So, I say this as a general preface about getting out of history. This is the real dropout situation. For example, in a certain way of talking, it's about dropping out because you step off the wheel of samsara, the rat race of birth and death, where you are always living for a future. In nature, you see, when you cause a vacuum, dropping out of one situation naturally means dropping into another. So, observe carefully where you drop in when you drop out. Well, now, that brings me to this point, which I'll call the great diversion. The future is something you cannot work for exactly the same reason you cannot work to be happy. Happiness, it's always said, is a byproduct. It accrues when you become absorbed in something else entirely, some other quest. A quest for a vision or for doing something, anything, may bring happiness. In the same way, the good future, the great society, the grand tomorrow is never attained by working for it directly. When you have that idea embodied just as much in the 5-year plan as it is in the great society, of working for that thing, you'll never make it. The only way to get the good future is by diverting from time altogether, at right angles to the course of history. So, what's important now, today, is to create a diversion of such splendor that people forget about the things they think are important. All their squabbles, all their ridiculous projects for progress that end up destroying the planet. Let it go. Let it all go. Because something else is happening that's a great deal more fun. Imagine, for instance, a grand casino in Las Vegas. There's been a high-stakes, high-drama game going on all night. People are emotional, desperate, nearly bankrupt, and a crowd is gathered. Just as it reaches a boiling point, something begins in another corner of the casino. A party, a spectacle, something lighthearted. Laughter erupts. Slowly, people in the crowd turn their heads, distracted. One by one, they leave the intense game to join this new, lively table. Finally, the gamblers left in the first game look around, ready to drop the final bombshell, and realize nobody is watching anymore. That's it. The game ends. This is the only way to deal with the future, to create a magnificent diversion. Instead of living according to the trajectory of history, we live for the present, using our existing capacities for joy and creativity. Don't wait. This creates a fantastic diversion from history. Then, you see, humanity can regain sanity, becoming non-historical again, like the bees, the ants, or the birds. Now, I know people bristle at the idea of living like ants. They think, that's dull. But that's only because we're not close enough to see the individuality within their simple lives. Ants are individuals. They have subtle distinctions in their colorings, their antennae, and their movements, just as important to them as facial differences are to us. To ants, their lives are the very good life. Yes, there are occasional troubles, wars, for instance, but they've lived like this for millions of years without progress. You might say that sounds boring. Maybe, but only if you're obsessed with keeping records and living in the past. This brings us to a critical point. Memory and its counterpart, forgettery. Memory is a wonderful thing, but just as vital is the ability to forget. Civilization has focused so much on storage and preservation, that we've ignored elimination. The human body itself balances this. We have an intake and an output. But society is constipated with its own waste. Mountains of garbage are crowding us, physically and mentally. Take, for example, academia. I know this world well. Scholars today are overloaded with information, so much so that it becomes absurd. To write an article, you must adhere to meticulous standards, ensuring not a single diacritical mark or detail is misplaced. Otherwise, a peer will demolish you in a footnote. The process becomes ridiculous. One scholar I knew spent years compiling material for 2 enormous volumes of work, only to realize nobody would read them. He finally decided, enough, I'm going to have fun, and published the graphics as vibrant posters instead. You see, this is what happens when intellectual analysis is pushed too far. It's like overcooking a souffle, it disintegrates. Education, too, has become a means to an end, aiming at goals, ranks, and salaries instead of fostering genuine love for learning. The word school once meant leisure, a place for scholars and gentlemen who studied for the joy of it. Now it's a system of endless deadlines, pressures, and irrelevant facts. To escape this, we must rediscover the amateur spirit, the love of doing something for its own sake. The professional does it for a paycheck. The amateur does it for love. Amateur comes from the Latin amare, to love. This shift is crucial. And so, we return to the idea of diversion. Robert Oppenheimer once said, "The world is going to hell, and the only way to stop it is not to try." Why? Because efforts to save the world often exacerbate the problem, like the sorcerer's apprentice unleashing chaos. Our economy mirrors this chaos. It must grow or collapse. We're pressured to consume endlessly, to own more and more, even as this mindset destroys us. Progress becomes cancerous, an uncontrollable growth that will inevitably explode. The only solution is to stop. Stop time. Stop the future. Create a diversion. When Jesus said, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow," he wasn't offering an impossible precept. He was pointing to the wisdom of living in the present. He told parables not for their surface meaning but for their later effects. The present isn't a razor-thin line between past and future. It's expansive. It encompasses both, like a traveler seeing where they've been and where they're going. When we accept this, we can truly live. So then, the question becomes, how do we predict those far futures that are not within our present vision by calculation? It may be astronomical, navigational calculation, or, as it was in all times, astrological. People thought they had, in astrology, the means to foresee the future and know what to do. Then the question arises, what of, supposing there is a fine science of prediction, whether it be scientifically respectable like navigation or meteorology, which isn't too hard, predictions, like a cat or a dog, when seeing another dead cat, will not necessarily think, "That's going to happen to me." Because, you see, a true animal, a truly functioning entity, is not self-conscious in that way. For example, you all know that only other people have heads. Only, how do you become concerned with your head? Why? Because you've been made conscious of your face. You've looked in mirrors, you've been talked about it. It's the only part of our body that we live permanently. And even when we put gloves on, we know our hands are covered. We always keep the face naked. And you learn that you're there in terms of having enough you can touch. For a good face and loose face, all these things indicate the importance of the face. But is it one that everyone wears? Inside, beyond the face, where are you? If you were living naturally, you would be as unself-conscious as your head. Even then, the brain is not sensitive to probes. So, you would live in terms of all this going on as you. But you've been taught, or the idea has been smashed into your head, by social indoctrination, and your face has been made to stand for you. The real you, behind the face, is everything that you see, hear, touch, and sense. So, the headless man you've never had to go out of your head to lose your mind to see, is, in a way, always characteristic of the wise man. Because he's come back to his original emptiness, which is behind the face. See, when you turn to see your hand and what is behind the eye, you can't. It's not dark, it's not light. You just can't apprehend it in any way at all. And that's what it's all about. But, so then, when you start calculating and you resort to projection, you are now trying to get hold of all of us. But many people have an instinctive feeling, say, when confronted with a great astrologer who could tell them all the future, "I don't want to hear, and rather not." And this is, in a way, a wise, if uninformed, reaction. For the simple reason, well, let's put the other point of view. From another point of view, a realistic person might say, the trouble with you is, you don't want to know your future because you're afraid of life. If you knew your future, you could take practical steps to adapt things to it. If you knew you were going to die next Tuesday, you would immediately put your house in order and make less trouble for your friends and relations. Face it, that sounds all right to begin with. It's like all technology is initially a success. But the real problem, the kindly one, comes to this. When the outcome of a game is known, the game is cancelled. Because the whole point of playing the game is that we don't know the outcome. The known future is already past. And the higher the degree of certainty of knowledge as to the future, to that extent it has happened, you've had it. And we don't want to put the future in that situation, not really. Because, how easy it is, if you think of the cosmos as basically a game of hide and seek, where the Lord God is creating the universe by forgetting that it is God. I'm imagining that if you, then, this is the fundamental way of getting rid of the eternal boredom of knowing all about it. And of there being no surprises. The whole vitality of being alive is that it is always surprising. To be enlightened is to be surprised at everything. That it is a wonder, that everything is a miracle, that it is highly improbable and really shouldn't happen, but there it is. If there isn't that sense, there is no vitality in any of it. That, again, of course, we have the problem that I discussed yesterday in another form, the problem of order and randomness, and the drawing of the line, you see, where to draw the line between order and randomness. So, in the same way, where to draw the line between the known and the unknown, how much to predict, how much to say, well, I'd rather leave tomorrow to tomorrow. Sufficient unto the day is the trouble. So, you see, again, it's all a question of where to draw the line, how much to control, and realize that when you go beyond a certain degree of control, when you go beyond a certain what I will call natural provision, such as I described by the analogy of looking out of the window of the train, when you go beyond a certain degree of natural provision, you will encounter a law of diminishing returns. The more you succeed, the more you fail. And then you get into this sort of, I described it yesterday from the academic point of view, when scholarship acquires an exactness and a highly detailed degree of information, that constitutes an information bomb. And nobody can keep track of it, and the whole thing becomes a bore. Who wants to keep track of it any longer? Who gives a damn, about those final details of Shakespeare's use of the conjunction it? So, in the same way, in practical politics, we have reached a state today where law is out of hand. There is too much paper, too many whereas clauses, subclauses, and so on. Nobody can keep track of it. The whole thing is in a state of total confusion. And this confusion exists in the name of sanity, in the name of trying to set things in order. Because everybody shouts when somebody does something wrong. There ought to be a law against it. And soon there is indeed a law against it. There's a law against everything. We are all, at this moment, doing something illegal. I don't know what it is, but it's always there. And somebody can find it out and invoke it if they wish to make trouble for us. I'm quite sure that my entire situation is illegal. And so for everybody. And this is the result, you see, of wanting to pin everything down. In ancient China, the Confucians had a thing they called the rectification of names. The Confucians are curious people because, while they have some marvelous ideas, they're certainly lacking in humor. They're rather ponderous, puritanical, and stuffy. The Taoists, on the other hand, have humor, and are always making fun of the Confucians. The rectification of names was that Confucius said we must be sure, when we use words, that their meaning is established. So, this means the dictionary. They were the first real serious thinkers about dictionaries, about definitions, about laying down what the words mean. But the Taoists pointed out by saying, if you're going to rectify the words, what are you going to rectify them with? Well, they said, with words. Well, then they said, how are you going to rectify the words you use to rectify the words? They thought about that. And then they said, well, their words are self-rectifying. That is to say, you rectify words with words, and the words you use to rectify the words are rectified with other words. It's a closed circle. So, you can't play a game called Vish, in which you supply the players each with a copy of the same dictionary. Then, you have a lot of words written on slips of paper and put into a hat. Somebody pulls a word out of a hat, and everybody looks it up in the dictionary. Then, they take the definition and look up a key word in the definition and look that up and so on until they get back to the word they started with. The first person to get back to the word that everybody started with calls out, Vish, short for vicious circle. And then, there's an umpire present to rule on whether they cheated, whether they looked up the word to instead of record or observe, or whatever. So far, the dictionary only gets out of a vicious circle where there is a picture beside the word. Then it escapes. But otherwise, all attempts to pin down words are simply going in a vicious circle. So, one uses words effectively by not trying to pin them down too hard. But we are always saying, put it in writing. If we're really serious about an agreement between two people, put it in writing. Because I can trust the document, but I'm not sure if I can trust you. Do you exist? Prove it. Have your birth certificate, passport, card of identity. If you can produce this wretched piece of paper, you're there.